Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. Don't let them scribble and daydream too much. Make them be teachers and actors and such. Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. They're lost in their heads and they won't go to bed, even with someone they love. Writers ain't easy to look and they're harder to read. If you want description, they'll give you much more than you need. Noisy typewriters and turtleneck sweaters, and each day begins with a line.
Hi, my name is McCarthy Coyle, and you're watching A Public Conversation, and our guest this evening, in fact, an inaugural guest, State Senator Mignon Waterman, is the first to brave the territory of Missoula Community Access Television. Mignon, is it all right if I use your first name?
Please do.
All right,
Please
thank
do.
you. A lot of the Missoula audience are familiar with this format, but I haven't been on the airways for a while because I've been traveling. I was living over in Basin for a while, and I was in Ireland for a while, and but I'm glad to be home, and I'm a person who's keeps a close eye on the public life in Montana. I'm very interested, of course, in politics, as so many Montanans are. And so I'm delighted that you're here, and really appreciate it. Is our famous heather plant getting in anyone's aesthetic way? I hope not. Anyway, and the show will air again tomorrow at 3:30 in the afternoon. And
Well, I'm delighted to be here, McCarthy.
Thanks.
It's just delightful.
Right. Just before the show, we had a chance to chat, and I just thought that the community of Missoula is a little bit shocked out tonight because this train derailment out in Alberton and the escape of the chlorine gas, and people are really concerned about it. And so I thought that I'd at least, I don't expect any breaking bulletins from us, but there was a press release that I received today from Montana Cheer, and also Ann Hedges of the Montana Environmental Information Center. And it says, early this morning, a train hauling nearly 800,000 pounds of deadly chlorine gas headed for a Montana manufacturing facility derailed. At least one of the tankers carrying 170,000 pounds of the material has emptied. At least 37 people have been treated for chlorine inhalation, 3 who are critically injured, according to the press release. Town of Alberton, about 25 miles west of Missoula, has been evacuated. As many as 600 other residents in the path of the chlorine gas have also been evacuated. This type of disaster is totally preventable, is a quote from Tony Tweedale, who's a spokesperson for Montana Cheer, the coalition spearheading the campaign to make Stone Container the facility that apparently the cargo was intended for. But Tony Tweedale says, quote, it is companies like Stone Container and other large manufacturing facilities who have elected to use this poison when safer alternatives have existed for years. And then Ann Hedges of the Montana Environmental Information Center in Helena said these companies' chosen chemical dependency is a continuing threat to the people of Montana and everywhere. Their chemical dependency puts us all at risk, close quote. But you served in state. Let me acquaint the audience with, and then you can fill in. You were born in Billings, 1944, I believe.
Right.
And your mother, who's 88, is in her 3rd term as a county commissioner in Boulder. Is that right?
City commissioner.
City commissioner in Boulder.
Yeah.
And is she a Democrat as well?
No, and she will tell you that she never raised her daughter to be a Democrat. But she has been wonderful and supportive, and she is a great role model to me of public service.
So you were born in Billings. You went to journalism school at the University of Montana in the mid-'60s. You didn't complete school, right?
No, I dropped out to put my husband through law school.
That's a famous American story, isn't it?
It is. That was typical of that generation.
And you have 2 grown sons.
I do.
And they're both living in Washington State.
That's right.
Right. And tell us, you've been in the Montana State Senate since 1990.
That's right.
And you're in your second term now.
Correct.
And in your first election, you defeated a long-term Republican incumbent?
That's right.
Right, okay. I want to get back to your years in service in Helena. But I also did want to follow up a little. If you came from a Republican, family background, was there a time, what is a Democrat and how did you come to be one?
I chose to be a Democrat, and I was raised in a family that was not politically active. My family was a working class family that worked to keep house and home together. My mother worked for the post office. My dad ran a wrecking yard in Billings. And I was the youngest of 5 children. My grandfather lived with us for a while. I don't remember our family being politically active or really having great political discussions other than cussing and discussing politicians in general at times, which I think is typical of a lot of kitchen table conversations. I served 12 years on the school board in Helena, which was a nonpartisan position, had not been active in a political party. As I was working for the Montana Association of Churches for 4 years, I was approached to run for the legislature, and quite honestly, I looked at both parties. Because
were you approached by both parties?
I was approached by both parties, which I think is fairly typical of people who've been involved in school board and haven't been partisan active. People will approach them. And I looked at the platforms of both parties. I talked about them with individuals who were active in the party. And from my involvement in the Montana legislature, I just knew I was a Democrat. The social issues that I am concerned about are issues that are aligned with the Democratic Party. So I made my choice that I was a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat, and I'm running for this seat because I want to see it remain a Democratic seat.
If you were, let's say you were successful in a primary, do you, in a political race, we sometimes have these, do you see yourself at that point in November as running with President Clinton, or would you keep your distance, or have you thought about that?
Oh, I think President Clinton has done an excellent job as president. He's begun to address the deficit. I'm very supportive of his re-election.
Okay, thanks. So, you've been in the state senate now 6 years.
Correct.
Right. And we started out with this, because you came into the studio in Missoula and hadn't been up on some of that train news, etc. What's life like in the legislature? Sometimes to the ordinary person, or even sitting out here. Well, I've been up there, and it often seems like a madhouse. What do you think of the effectiveness of the legislative process in Montana as it stands? And just to go back to that question that I raised, what about safety issues? Safety issues in general, but let's talk about railroads. I did say that I acknowledged that it had been my impression that over the last good many years that that a lot of us have seen more and more train accidents in the state of Montana, and grain cargo spilling, and problems with the animals as a result. Long time until it got cleaned up properly. A lot of derailments, and now this chlorine gas derailment. Have you any observation to make on railroad safety regulation as a state legislator?
Well, first of all, I think all of our hearts go out to those family members and those individuals that were injured in the accident today, and I think we're all just very hopeful and praying that they will be well and that there won't be long-term injury to those individuals. So I want to acknowledge my concerns about them, first of all. Anytime there are accidents, whether it's a railroad accident, whether it's a plane crash, whether it is an automobile accident. We all are concerned about safety, and we need to ask, is there something that can be done to prevent the accidents from happening in the first place? I, like you, am concerned that we are seeing more accidents. I don't know whether we're more aware of them or indeed whether there are more, but I think that that's a legitimate question that needs to be asked. Clearly, as hazardous chemicals are hauled by, whether it's by truck or by rail, we need to be concerned to see that it is hauled safely and that there is adequate staffing on the railroads or in the trucking industry to see that they're hauled safely and adequate precautions are taken if there happens to be an injury.
This opens this question up, because if you know, if we take you at your literal word, right, then let's say you were to get to Washington and you say, and we have this whole, it seems like there's whole discussion going on over big government and, you know, regulation and more regulation. How do you see you know, this political problem when, on the one hand, there's a perceived need or a real need for somebody to do something? What happens to you, let's say, if you wind up in the House of Representatives and you say, you know, I think we really need to put some teeth back in here and you know, force the, you know, the railroads to do this or the trucking industry to do that, and that the opposite being that you know, you or others are perceiving, no, too much governmental regulation. I mean, what's the balance here? What's the balance?
We have to remember the basic purpose of government is, in my mind at least, is to help people who cannot help themselves, to protect people who cannot protect themselves. There is a legitimate role for government, and one of those roles is to ensure the safety of the people. And I think that's a legitimate role for government. We want to do it with as little bureaucracy and as little red tape as possible. I think here in Montana, we can understand the issues of traveling long miles in this state, what the safety is for railroads and for highways. So I would certainly hope that any safety precautions and requirements are built from the ground up so that Montanans have a say in them, of how safety regulations are carried out in this state. But there is certainly a legitimate government role.
And do you cook?
Yeah,
Yeah?
everyone in my house cooks. I don't cook a lot anymore.
What do you
but
do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Lately I've been reading a lot of material about budgets, and I read, I hike. I have in the past windsurfed, but I have not done it for the last few years. I've been too busy. There was a period of time when I used to do quilting, but I have not had that time in the last couple of years.
Your resume seems to indicate a lot of administrative positions, public relations, as it were, in some areas that seem like, you know, information, lobbying as well, right? And how does that fit into the goal of being in the Congress? I mean, or I guess I'm trying to get a handle on what is it that you do well? What sets you apart from your opponents in the Democratic primary? What is it that you know, or what do people think that you do well at? You know, what is it?
I listen to people very well. I work well with people with diverse opinions to hear them. I'm known as a bridge builder in the Montana legislature. But in all of my jobs that I have had, when I worked with the Montana Association of Churches, I didn't just lobby. There were 11 mainline church denominations. I didn't lobby on any issue that they didn't all agree on. So we had to build a consensus between sessions, which meant I traveled to churches around the state, met with church study groups and individuals, and we discussed issues. Most of our issues were human service issues that we lobbied on, and we would reach a consensus. We'd study the issues, and it was only if all of the denominations agreed that we would lobby on an issue. So it was really a wonderful role with great people. We worked with a farm mediation program in eastern Montana, and we worked on human service issues that worked with the poor, with those who did not have someone to lobby for them. So again, I was a consensus builder, a bridge builder. With my job with the Montana Council of Teachers of Mathematics, again, I am working with teachers, classroom teachers in the state of Montana, to help them effectively relate to businesses and to parents and to involve their communities in what they're doing in their math classroom. It's a wonderful job. It's been a wonderful opportunity. So I work with people to reach common consensus.
And are you a supporter of the death penalty?
No.
No. Could you talk about, I mean, it's gun control.
I think that I come from a hunting family in Montana,
Right.
and no one in my family uses a street sweeper to hunt elk or deer. I don't see a reason for assault weapons. I think we're blessed in the state of Montana to live in wonderful country, regardless of what the national press is perceiving us as right now.
Right.
We have a wonderful, loving people here, and by and large, we're safe on the streets, and our children are safe in our schools. The rest of this country is not so blessed. So we need to recognize that there is a greater good for this country to protect our children and our families and our communities from crime. But at the same time, I am concerned that in Montana, with the Brady bill, for example, we have an unfunded mandate here that is a burden on local governments, and I have concerns about that.
You mean you like, partly being that somebody's got to pay to get the work done?
Yeah.
I mean, is it?
Yeah. And we have small sheriff's offices and police departments that have difficulty doing that. I can understand the need for it in large cities.
And you've been in the legislature 6 years. What would you say is your toughest or proudest accomplishment in 6 years?
My proudest accomplishment is working with senior citizens in this state to revise long-term care. I was vice chairman of the Human Service Subcommittee of Finance and Claims from the time I was elected in 1991. And those were the years when we had to cut $200 million out of the state budget. I had the opportunity to work on revising the long-term care program with senior citizens in the state to make the program more responsive. As we looked at the budget, and a lot of people have focused on welfare as needing to balance the budget, and we need to cut welfare. Well, you don't have to be on the budget committee very long to realize that the major expenditure in Montana is on long-term care for elderly and disabled. So I began to look at other states to see what they were doing and discovered the state of Oregon had saved over $100 million by changing the way they delivered services in long-term care. There is a role for nursing homes and long-term care, a legitimate role. Some people cannot take care of themselves and they need to be in a nursing home. But for too many Montanans, that was the only option they had if they could no longer take care of themselves at home. As a senior citizen here in Missoula once told me, getting old isn't an illness. And senior citizens like my mother should not have to spend the last 10 years of their lives dreading where they're going to end up. So I worked for the last 3 years with senior citizens and providers from across the state to develop community-based services that are cost-effective, appropriate, and they're saving the state money and providing options for seniors. It has been wonderful.
So let's leap from there, and what would you say if you wound up in the House of Representatives? What do you think? What would be the your first choice for a committee that you'd want to work on, and an issue that if you said to the folks in Montana, in 2 years I want to have achieved X. So committee, job, work goal and accomplishment goal.
I think I would like to work on Medicaid long-term care reform because that's an area I've worked. But quite honestly, that's one of the things that I'm discussing with Montanans as I go across this state, because I need to look at this at where I can best serve Montanans. We are an agriculture state, obviously serious concerns about environment in the state of Montana and jobs and job training and economic development. So I want to talk to Montanans about where they think I can best serve them. I'm not going to make that decision until I've had an opportunity to talk to them about what they believe I can do best.
be sure to check in at Fort Harrison and ask the folks up there too. I'm
That's
a
right.
vet, and I get very good services at Fort Harrison.
You know, Fort Harrison is one of the reasons that I decided to get into this race. It disturbed me. I live in Helena, and my district is in Helena. It disturbed
Excuse me, Fort Harrison is the
Veterans
Veterans Administration outpatient facility as well as a residential hospital, and a lot of Montana vets rely on the VA there for their care.
That's right.
For their,
And it disturbed me when our government shut down in December to see employees at the Veterans Hospital working without pay, because of course they weren't going to leave their patients without care. They needed to continue those services. But to see the community collecting food baskets for those employees and for local banks and financial institutions to extend their loans on their homes, that is not how government should function, and that's not what Montanans want from their government.
do you remember, I don't know how many years ago, maybe someone on the crew or yourself would remember, we had 1 year in Montana. It was during a presidential primary day, election day in Montana, when we didn't we had caucuses rather than the primary. This may have been before you jumped into to party business. But have you had experience in both forms, primaries and caucuses, in terms of choosing candidates?
No, I have not. I've always been involved in the primary process.
Richard Nixon and the Reuther brothers, the labor leaders, Walter and Victor Reuther of the United Auto Workers, powerhouses, of course, in the American labor movement, and President Nixon spoke of a guaranteed annual wage. It was a trial balloon that went up, interestingly and seriously, and was quickly pulled down by, it was never known who pulled it down. But I continue to remember that and ask other people about it as whether this needs another look as one financial replacement mechanism for all manner of, entitlement programs. I don't know if I'm using the word correctly there, but let's say the welfare office or the unemployment compensation office, that those would, kind of disappear once we determined as a people that a guaranteed annual wage was a good idea. Have you heard of the guaranteed annual wage?
I've heard discussions of it, but I'm not very familiar with the issue. I do think that we have a serious problem in this country with a shrinking middle class. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And one of the things I hear as I go across the state of Montana is that Montanans are working longer hours and feel that they're falling further behind. This country cannot survive as a democracy without a strong middle class, and I think we need to rebuild the middle class in this nation. And one of the ways we do that is by balancing profits with people and increasing wages for people.
By the way, folks out there in Never Never Land, we'll be taking calls. We hope to hear from you soon. I'm just going to take a few more minutes, and I appreciate your non-surprise as I jump around from question to question and topic to topic. Campaign reform. I mean, have you projected ahead? Like, if you were to win this nomination for the House nomination, have you actually sat down at home and or with professional colleagues and said, how much will a race cost me? And where are we going to get it?
Certainly asked that question before I got into this race, and I've heard projections that this race from beginning to end could well cost $1 million. Personally, that appalls me. We could spend $1 million doing some good for
$1 million for one, for you.
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
and $1 million for each candidate.
Well,
if they got the,
it'd be for the general
for the
election
primary
candidates.
and the general,
Yeah.
over $1 million.
Yeah, but
right?
still, that's a lot of money
Yeah.
to spend, And we do need to address campaign reform in this nation.
Well,
It appalls me that we spend that kind of money electing public officials.
it's well, I'd like to talk about this a little bit
Okay.
more. Because campaign reform supposedly was on the agenda of both the Republican and the Democratic parties in Washington, and nothing has happened. I'll make one particular observation because it's one I'm most familiar with, and that is to say, generally across the nation, the vast majority of all the funds that people use, in political campaigns, it goes for radio and television advertising.
That's right.
And it's no secret in Montana that I don't think that this is a proper thing, that the airwaves belong to the public, and that this certainly gets talked about in the debates in Washington, but I don't think candidates in Montana running for office, I mean, what if all the candidates agreed not to pay the broadcasters? And they said, well, why don't you just cover us and find out what we have to say? Mm-hmm. Anyway, but I'll let you, that's my shot, I mean, don't you think that something has to change there in terms of campaign reform? And
I certainly hope that we can address campaign reform, because the present system is so unfair. It shuts some Americans out from running for public office. Mm-hmm. They don't have the money. Short of public financed campaigns, though, which I don't think the American public is ready to accept, it's a very difficult issue to address. If you tell people that you're going to limit the amount of money that can be contributed, but individuals can spend as much on their campaigns as they want, then you end up with a rich person's race. You end up with the Stephen Forbes. And that's not what Americans want. This should not be a rich person's game. We are blessed in this country that we don't elect our leaders because of their lineage or their wealth, but we are a democracy that elects representative government, and that means common people need to be able to run without a great deal of money.
Well, I was thinking about, go back and forth here a minute. Now, in Montana, for example, I didn't have to have $1,000 in change to run if I went out and got signatures. What if the rule said everybody has to get signatures and nobody has to pay any money?
See, I think getting onto the ballot is one thing. I don't think that is the cost that stops most
Right.
people from filing. It's the cost of campaigning.
You said that you don't think the American public is ready for public financing of campaigns. Do you think that they're happy that the presidential campaigns are paid for by public funds? Or is that just something that we have fallen into the habit of accepting?
I think that people are still very concerned about the whole process of the way the system works today, and they're not satisfied with it.
I'll say flat out, I'm not satisfied with, public monies pay for the bulk of the national conventions of both major parties. Millions and millions, not just on the presidential race, but the convention is part of the things that we cough up public tax dollars for. And I don't think, I think I find that bizarre. And especially in a country which, while it's still called a two-party, everybody has been, still, it seems to be in its expressions turning into a multi-party country of sorts. And but anyway, we got a call on line 1, and I'll take it. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question about school funding.
All right.
Okay. I'm pretty concerned that funding is at a crisis right now for schools in Montana because of some legislation that was enacted recently, and I was wondering what kind of things you could do to improve that situation.
Now remember, Mignon may have a double answer because she's a state senator, but are you putting that in the context of what she would do on the federal level if she got to that point?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks.
I think that it needs to be a priority, and I don't see that happening in our country or our state right now.
Okay, thanks. It's all yours.
All right. I first got involved in public life because as a mom I was concerned about my children's education. I spent 12 years on the Helena School Board because of that. In public life, I've been concerned and have fought for quality education for kids, and I intend to do that in Congress. You're right that the federal government is not a major player in school funding, but the funding that schools do receive from the federal government is critical. It's for programs like Title I that help kids that are having trouble with reading and mathematics. It helps provide technology for schools. The average gas station in Missoula has more technology than the average classroom in Missoula. How can we prepare our children for any job in the workforce if they don't have access to technology? Education funding is a priority. In my parents' generation, if you had a strong back and you were willing to work, you could move into the middle class. Today in America, the only way to move into the middle class is with an education, and that is vital, and we need to find ways to fund quality education for our kids. And although the bulk of that funding comes from the state level, and the state of Montana continues to struggle with it, and I look at communities like Missoula that care very much about education and their children's futures and see the struggles they're going through. The Missoula district is looking at a 25% cut in Title I funds and is in the process of issuing termination notices to 6 teachers, partly because the federal budget has not been resolved. And so they don't know what kind of funding they're having. Education has always been a priority in my public service and will continue to be.
You have a follow-up question, comment?
I think that what you said about the classroom teachers is really of a concern to me. Not so much technology. It seems like in Missoula anyway, we've spent quite a bit of money on technology, and things look pretty good there. But as far as just ensuring that we'll have a decent student-teacher ratio for our kids, that's really a priority, I think.
It always has to be a priority because the teacher is the single most important individual in that classroom when it comes to teaching our children. And they need to have the time to work with parents and with children, and they need to have a class size that allows them to do that.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks. Don't I recall that the Republicans under Gingrich hadn't they called for the elimination of the Federal Department of Education?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me get movement both in the state of Montana and on the federal level for an increase in the minimum wage. Could you speak to that?
I'm supporting the increase in the minimum wage in Montana. Again, I think if anyone works 40 hours a week, they should be able to support their family out of poverty. I think it's criminal that someone would still be eligible for food stamps after working 40 hours a week. One of the goals of the welfare reform program has been to allow people to work their way out of poverty. But the truth is that you could work at a minimum wage job and not do that. I understand the concerns of businesses and that we need to be sensitive to businesses, but businesses also need to be sensitive to their workers. And I support the increase in the minimum wage.
And on a federal level, and of course of interest to us here in Montana, there were two of many major battles on Capitol Hill last year, but 2 of them involved, mining royalty claims, where the mines come into Montana and elsewhere, and at a very cheap price that was set in the last century, I believe, can anyone help me? $5 per acre of the claim area. Anyway, some minuscule amount of money, and there was a movement, on the part of the Democrats at that time, 1992, 93. And that was one of the Clinton initiatives, and on the Hill, to increase that payment that mineral extractors would have to pay for the rights to mine valuable and precious assets. Another example, and then I'll leave it to you, is the increase in fees for the grazing fees on public lands, and in both those cases, at least to my knowledge, on the Senate side, Montana senators and Senator Baucus rushed over to the White House, and there was a big to-do. So I'd like you to comment on if you want to be there in Washington, jumping into these discussions. What do you think is fair in for us here in Montana? On the one hand, you get people saying, well, they're public lands. Right now, the leasing rate, the grazing leasing rate, is below market price. That a lot of ranchers, not all, but some ranchers, don't pay sufficient attention to their herds, and the herds foul up stream beds and abuse the land, as cattle will do. So it's in that context that I pose those. What do you think?
Certainly the mining law that met the needs of this country in the last century is not going to meet the needs of the state of Montana as we move into the next century. And it needs to be revised, and I think we need to sit down together and find some common ground to build a proposal that will allow mining to operate in a responsible manner, but at the same time recognizes the change in public use and the value of that land. Likewise, we need to do the same thing with grazing. Some of the strongest concerns about federal grazing prices has come from people who are in competition because they're leasing state lands. And again, I think we need to sit down with the agriculture community and the people who use those lands for other purposes and discuss changes. But clearly, both of those laws need to be revised.
Okay, maybe we can come back to that. Thanks, and thanks for your responsiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And you're, where are you on women's right to choose?
I think there are some things that government cannot do for people, just as I think there is a valid role for government in some things. There are some things that government cannot do. And I think the decision that a woman needs to make needs to be made by her and by her doctor and her family. Government should not have a role in that. Mm-hmm. I'm pro-choice.
Mm-hmm. Is your 88-year-old mother pro-choice?
I don't know. You'd have to ask her.
Okay. I hope someday I get up that way. I'll
and I'm
stop
sure she will
City
tell
Hall
you.
and ask her. I just thought that's an interesting question. Apparently, there's a lot of pro-choice Republicans out there, from what I read. Anyway, could you're up in the state legislature, and you travel the state of Montana to one degree or another. What's your take, as an Anglo, as I am? What is the condition of our relationship as a people, the majority in this case, with the Indian nations of Montana? What have you seen? What have you heard? What's your observation on, are we all just having a wonderful time up here? I mean, I don't read much about Indian nations in the newspaper. I don't see much about them on television. I can't say that I feel like there are other places that somehow are tucked far away from, our concerns. What's been your experience? And go for it.
Okay. I've served on the Indian Affairs Committee. I am presently involved in a Kellogg Families for Kids program that is working on permanency planning for adoptions in the state. And I serve on the Revenue Oversight Committee for the legislature. In all three of those areas, we've dealt with tribal sovereignty and with issues that relate to Native American children and to Native American families in this state. I think we have to avoid generalities that all whites or all Native Americans. I think the relations between the state of Montana and the federal government and the 7 sovereign nations in this state vary from reservation to reservation and from issue to issue. But I think we need to be concerned, especially about Native American children. I have serious concerns about all children in Montana, but Native American children seem to have problems that are exacerbated by the poverty on the reservations and by the cultural diversity that is out there in a system that has not addressed their needs.
Well, you want to go to Washington. You've been an observer and a participant in the Montana scene. We all know about the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Again, this is one of my long context setting. Again, going like when and you have better knowledge of Helena than I do by a long shot. But when there's a new governor elected, then there's usually a new Indian liaison person who's designated. And as far as what I know, and most of the rest of us know, that's the end of it. That there's one person in some office up there who is customarily a Native American, but I don't hear of I don't hear of any relationships of structures. I don't know what Helena and state government is doing in terms of if anything about if there's only one person representing the governor, as it were, and the state capital in its relationship to 7 Indian nations, then I would say that that's not very many to be attending to it.
If that were true, that wouldn't be, but that is not the case in Helena.
No,
the folks that I have worked with, and I generally work in education and human services, state employees are very concerned about Native American children and work daily with the Indian Child Welfare Act, with education on reservations and the education of Native American children. I see very caring, dedicated state employees that are very concerned about Native American kids.
You see Native Americans in subjective call. Do you see many Native Americans? Do you see enough Native Americans in positions of major responsibility throughout Montana?
They're certainly underrepresented, and one of the things that I've worked with the Montana Council of Teachers of Mathematics is to encourage more Native American students to take more mathematics and to go on to become mathematics teachers, because students need role models. And at the time I began to work for the Montana Council of Teachers of Math, there were only 3 Native American high school mathematics teachers in the state. One of our goals is to increase that number.
I've been curious about this for some time, or I guess I should say I'm curious enough to write about it on occasion, and that is to say, you want to go and represent Montana in the House of Representatives in Washington. At the House, there are some delegates who are elected from territories and possessions. The Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., the U.S. Virgin Islands, all have elected delegates to the House of Representatives. And what about Indian nations being able to, if these territories and possessions, which in my understanding of the English language are somewhat lesser entities than nations, what about, do you, I know that's I threw you a high ball there, but, I've thought about that, and I'm wondering what you thought of that idea.
I haven't thought of that, and I haven't heard it discussed. I'm not aware of Native Americans that are clamoring to serve in Congress. Yeah.
And that might be the best response you could give me.
As representatives of their nations, yeah.
Okay, but let me give you a more practical one about the Congress and its structure. The House of Representatives had always increased its representation after each census from the beginning of the founding of the Republic in 1989 up until 1910 and 11, when they decided to put a cap on the membership in the House. Most of the reasoning for that centered around things like efficiency, and other commentators have noted that there was some background there that suggested that as the good old boys, and they were all boys at that time, looked around and saw a lot of immigrants coming from all over the world and settling in the big cities and becoming citizens and voting and major black migration settling in larger cities, north and south, and that inevitably this would mean, if they continue to increase the size of the House, increase representation from people that they were not accustomed to. Now, that is another side of the historian's commentary on that. However, before I turn it over to you, I will say that it's a fact that our level of popular representation in the United States is the lowest of any of the industrial democracies in the world. The lower house of the Parliament in England has over 600 members, and France, and Italy, and New Zealand, and Australia, and Japan. And all those lower houses have a larger membership to reflect, Now, this was not done in any constitutional amendment because one was not needed. As I've reviewed the figures, let's stop there. Expansion of the House of Representatives.
Well, if capping was done to ensure efficiency, I think we've missed the mark. I am not sure enlarging the size of the House of Representatives will do that either. But I do think that Montana has certainly suffered a loss by only having one representative in Congress. This is a large state and has a great deal of diversity.
I knew that two of my questions were kind of, like expansion of the House of Representatives and the Indian Nation delegate status were kind of, I think good questions, but I'd only say that I guess I mentioned them to keep the public conversation going, and I don't always expect somebody to have a ready response. No one should. But I think that, like a lot of things that happen when I read the newspaper in Montana, the Montana press and the electronic media, is that a lot of things simply don't get talked about at all. So no one knows that you even had a choice in the matter, that there were other possibilities. For example, it seems to me now that in the American language now, there seems to be an equation on the part of some people and some parties, maybe many or all of the major parties, that the words free enterprise are a synonym and or mean the same thing as democracy. And I don't think they mean the same thing. I think that they are different words and expressions entirely, and that free enterprise is a choice about a way of doing business that a small or larger group of people make. But I think that our debates and our discussions in public are often lessened or demeaned because we do not engage in discussions about things like, well, is this the best economy that we could have? Is this the fairest economy that we could have? Have you thought about the House of Representatives in terms of, you were talking about campaign reform and its necessity. I've mentioned a couple things. As you look at it from afar and from your experience, how do you think the House could work better?
I haven't given that a great deal of thought, but I do know that the system that we have watched in the last year is not working well. But I think more than the size of the body, it is that we've seen a lot of political posturing and a lot of rhetoric, and we have not seen people truly wanting to resolve the problems that are facing their government. And as I talk to Montanans, they feel that government has become unwieldy and is not being responsive to the true concerns that they have. They saw a rather extreme agenda from the Republicans and from Newt Gingrich last year, and do not believe that it reflected the issues that are facing Montana families. And that's what they want from their government. More than structural changes, they want a government that responds to real people needs.
Have you traveled out of the country?
Yes.
Where have you been?
Been to Germany to visit my brother when he lived there, and to Ecuador. My son worked with homeless children in Ecuador for 2 years, and we had the opportunity to go down and spend Christmas with him 1 year. And last year I had the opportunity to travel to China with Carol Williams, Pat Williams' wife, my husband and I, and Vivian and Joe Brook from here in Missoula went to the United Nations Conference on Women in China, spent 2 weeks. It was a wonderful experience.
you stumped me on there. You want to talk on what happened in China? I mean, what was the most? Tell us a couple of things about what was important
You know,
to
going
you and
Okay.
to yeah.
certainly was not something I had planned to do, and as you will probably recall, there was a great deal of controversy around that
Right.
conference, whether we should be participating, whether we were endorsing the human rights violations in China by going. Great deal of controversy about whether Hillary Clinton should go to that conference. And I had those same concerns as I prepared to go of whether or not this was a good idea to hold this conference there and whether I should be participating. What I found when I got there were 35,000 women from all over the world, the largest United Nations conference ever held. And these were women from all walks of life, Girl Scouts, women from the Red Cross, from the AAUW, from the League of Women Voters, lots of church women, mothers and daughters, Girl Scout troop. I have no idea how many Girl Scout cookies one has to sell to go to China. Women my mother's age, mothers and daughters. And what I found after a week there is that we all have more in common than separates us. Women all over the world, no matter what their happenstance, care about the same things. They want to be able to raise their children safely. They want to be able to provide for their family. They want a home. They want health care. They want to be able to educate their children. We do have differences in this world, but we would all be a lot better off if we try and find common ground to solve our problems, rather than looking for things that divide us. And that had a very profound effect on me. I'm pleased that I went, and if the conference had not been held in China, thousands of Chinese women would have not had the opportunity to participate. And I don't think the UN platform would have been as broad or as rich as it is.
Are you, when do you expect to see a woman president of the United States?
Soon, I hope.
I had a question. And feel free, to break in on me and tell us more about China or whatever you like to. You want to make sure that the folks in Missoula know that I may not have asked about. We've got plenty of time, although I know that you've got a road trip. You're heading home to Helena tonight?
I'm heading home tomorrow, but I do
Need
have,
to, right,
get on the way.
Visit and get some rest. And,
Yeah.
again, we thank Senator Waterman for coming in, and I wanted to thank you, as I will thank all the candidates, for having the chutzpah and the courage to run for public office. I think many of us think about it. I was encouraging a number of my friends, really, and to run, and sometimes I think not enough turn out to run. So I thank you for running.
Thank you.
And,
well, I think, people were concerned. They were surprised when Pat Williams chose not to run. And I think that this election brings new vitality to my party. There is going to be a strength and diversity in this primary. Everywhere I've traveled in this state, there are more people attending Democratic dinners and Democratic gatherings than ever before. And I think it's heightened the interest. I think Montanans are very concerned about this election, Republicans and Democrats both, because they see how important it is. I've always encouraged people to be involved in their communities, whether it's public office, and I've always encouraged women to run. And I'm delighted to see the number of candidates who are choosing to be involved.
Well, I'm curious about that, because hearing your, description of going to, it sounds like more of the more democratic affairs, but my last reading in the press, in terms of the number of Democrats running for both the House, the Montana House and the Montana Senate, were, really had a big gap in the numbers. And now I didn't see the final list, but I had seen a list about 2 weeks before the primary closed, or a week before, and there was the Democrats at that point were acknowledging that the that they didn't have enough candidates to win back control of either house in Helena.
I think that there were a lot of filings toward the end in both parties, and I believe that there are Democrats running for almost every seat now. I think there are not many uncontested races.
Now you'll force me to get on the phone and find out.
That's right, and I believe I'm correct about that.
Well,
but I think you do point out a problem, that there are several things that are discouraging people from running for public office, and I think we all need to be concerned about that. As much as people at times believe that government is unwieldy, that it's not listening to them, the strength of our system is that people participate. And anytime we have people who are not willing to serve, we need to ask ourselves why. I see the time commitment that it takes, whether you're serving on a local school board or city council, or whether you're serving in the legislature, that people are concerned about the time commitment it takes away from their jobs. It concerns me that there are many people who cannot afford to run for the legislature. It's very difficult for a single parent to run, for a small business person to run. And we should not be closing anyone out. The other thing is the cost of elections that you and I have already discussed. That's discouraging from people. And then the whole divisiveness of elections and how bitter it is, the public scrutiny. And we need public scrutiny of candidates, but if it turns people off from being involved because they believe their families or their children are going to be attacked, or that there are going to be these bitter battles between candidates, then people don't want to participate, and I think we're all losers when that happens.
It's been talked about over the years. I mean, we've had it both ways, and but are you one of those proponents who think in the state legislature who think that we ought to meet every year?
I carried legislation to have annual sessions because we are running a billion-dollar operation here, a multi-billion-dollar operation. A year ago, we started planning a budget that is going to carry us for the state of Montana that will carry us until 1999. I don't know of a business that could run their business that way. I think we have enough days that we meet already. I don't think we need to expand beyond the 90 days. But I do think that there could be a more rational way to approach it. There are some states that have a 30 system. They meet 30 days one year and 60 days the other.
1 year you consider the policy issues, and the next year you budget.
You do the budget. There are some that meet 45 and 45. There are a number of ways you could structure it, and proposals have been brought in by both Republicans and Democrats to look at that change. I think Montanans are rightfully concerned that they still want a citizens' legislature, and they want people to be involved in their government, and they're concerned about our becoming a full-time government, and we don't want that.
Okay. Cool. Hello, you're on the air. Hello, you're on the air. I think we lost.
Awesome.
They'll come back if they really want us.
Okay.
We broke your train of thought.
Well, I think we need to look at ways to restructure government to better meet people's needs. But Montanans have not had the opportunity to discuss that since the Constitutional Convention, and the legislature has not seen fit to pass that on to the public. But there are ways that we could better structure government to meet people's needs. One of the concerns that I have is with the present system, we don't allow people to participate enough. I wish there were a way that we could hold public hearings across the state on issues before legislation is developed. And there have been discussions that annual sessions would allow us to do that.
Well, let me give me a little opinion of my own, of course, and that is, you know, I noticed that when the Montana Association of Cable Television Operators, which effectively in the state of Montana means Telecommunications Incorporated, a system over which we're now proceeding into the homes of Missoulians. But no, just a technology point. They were having their convention, I think it was up in Kalispell, and the governor appeared, and they, easily and quickly enough, carried Governor Roscoe live to every household in the state of Montana that was on the TCI cable system. So the technology exists.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I mean, even the state owns a lot of technology now, and I would like all people and state legislators in particular, and we don't take advantage of the technology even that we have in place, and industry does not always race forward as they would, to help. Let's say if you wanted to hold a statewide public hearing and everyone could hear it at the same time and participate. I'd like to see a TCI racing to help us out with that one, just as they raced to carry the governor from their trade association meeting. But just a point about technology.
There are other states that televise and broadcast debates, floor debates, and I think Montanans would be better served if they had the opportunity to hear some of those debates and fully understand the issues that we're involved in. I think the idea of public participation via telecommunications in some hearings would be very good. Montana winters are brutal, and there are times when folks from eastern Montana simply cannot get to the Capitol to testify on legislation. The technology is certainly there to not only allow them to testify and for us to hear them, but for us to ask them questions and carry on two-way conversations with them. The technology is there, and I hope we continue to explore the possibility of using that technology to its fullest. Again, the more Montanans can participate in their government, the more they will understand it, and the better we will all be because of it.
Is it exciting to run for office?
It is wonderful. It is certainly time-consuming. There are parts of it I don't like. The idea of having to raise the money, the fact that we are reliant on 30-second sound bites and television advertising to reach people. I'm committed to getting out around the state and talking to Montanans about what they see as the issues. And that has been a delight, especially in the last couple of weeks with the focus of the national media on Montana. It has been wonderful to travel this state and see Montanans hear what their issues are and understand their real concerns and know that they are not what is a fairly limited view that the federal press is presenting of Montana right now. Montanans are wonderful people, very diverse population, but very caring individuals, and that's been wonderful.
Well, I've been reflecting on that myself the last couple of days and writing about it, and it is interesting because I like most Montanans, I wouldn't be here if I thought that I was in an unwelcoming place. And I agree with you that we're fortunate to be, in general, a very neighborly state.
And very caring, very community-oriented. And I think the beauty of Montana is a lot of the problems that plague the rest of this nation are solvable in Montana. We can do something about things like welfare. We can do things about crime. We can do things about education. We can do things about long-term care because we have caring communities and we have a population that's manageable.
Are you getting any support from any of the women's political groups like Emily's List and things like that?
I have been endorsed by Emily's List and the National Women's Caucus. Yes.
So Emily's List sends along a little money as well, don't they usually?
They send out letters profiling candidates to their membership.
I see.
The thing I like about that organization is they then don't lobby people. Their belief, and there are a number of organizations, both Republican and Democrat nationally, that include men and women, believe that we would be better served if more women were elected to Congress. And that is their only goal. They then don't lobby on specific issues after they're elected. They just want to see the number of women in Congress increased, and I'm finding that among a lot of Montanans too.
So how much money would you say you've spent so far, and how much do you expect to spend by the end of the primary campaign?
We're projecting that we need to raise $160,000 in the primary race. So far, I haven't spent a lot of money. I've been mostly traveling around the state visiting with people, have very minimal staff and offices, so have not spent much money yet.
But that's the projection.
Yeah, that's the projection of where we are.
And in that projection, is it, because I think I heard you say this yourself before, and help me out, that what percentage of that would you say is going to buy radio and television time?
The majority of it.
The majority of $160,000 is being spent on radio
That's how you
and
reach. That's how
television
you reach
time.
people in Montana.
And-
Unfortunately, I enjoy getting out and talking to people one-on-one. Not to say anything about this medium,
Right.
and this is an excellent medium because we have an opportunity to visit in depth.
Yep.
That's not true of most interviews, and certainly not true of advertising commercials. But the truth is that the media is important in campaigns.
A national question, something from your background, you may have. When Nixon led us, or led the nation away from, at least legislatively, we ended the draft law as it was. In other words, there was no more draft, and we went to what is called an all-volunteer professional armed force. Right. Okay. That's a part of what I'm setting up. This question of universal service, that is to say, in other words, a lot of people are not necessarily satisfied with an all-volunteer armed force, and there's this notion that we have universal service for everyone in the country. Whether when you turn 18 or 19, and you do a year or whatever time period, a year, let's say a year's worth of service, and that everyone, that was how I understood universal service, everyone, it included everyone, and I'll be with a caller in just a second. So everyone that turned 18, whether they were, including handicapped people and disabled people and people with learning disabilities, everyone filled some function for the community on a national level, and that was universal service. And some of those people, out of that great pool of young people, would choose, amongst those things, to be in the armed forces. Has that come up in your, over the years, has that concept has been discussed?
It hasn't come up in a formal way in any of my discussions, but I was blessed with a mother that always was involved, even when she was working, in doing things for others. I'm a firm believer that all of us who have been blessed with the riches of this country have an obligation to give back, and it's something I've instilled in my sons, and I believe that all of us need to find some way to give back to our communities.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I just would like to know how Senator Waterman feels about President Clinton's recent veto of the, I think it's a partial birth abortion bill. What are her feelings about that, and did she agree with this veto?
As I said before, I think there are some things that government cannot do, and I think the issue of choice is one that has to be left to a woman and her doctor and her family. And I believe that in this instance, it's a decision that needs to be made. It's a decision that needs to be made with the woman and her doctor. I'll trust the doctors and their medical training.
Okay. Thanks, caller. Hello. Hello, you're on the air.
Good evening, McCarthy.
Yes.
I'm glad the last caller brought up an issue that I wanted to talk about, and that was that the issue of this issue of abortion and the U.S. government. Frankly, this in my mind, this is comparable to the issue of drugs, the drug use and drug abuse, substance abuse, and the law. It's comparable in this way. I believe, to begin with, I believe that the issue of abortion People should be educated about the substances in a proper forum, in a proper manner, without fear tactics, without threats or any of this other stuff that goes on and still goes on despite our having a Democrat in the White House. This is the issue of abortion and the law and politics. Really, I'd like to know how did this get in? How did these two things get entwined? How did these two things get mixed up? It's an issue that I wish that you would further elaborate on, and I'd be more than happy to stand back and.
Well, hang in there, and I'm gonna send this right over to Mignon for.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm not sure that I understand what the question is.
The question is that what I was agreeing with you, ma'am, was I'm agreeing with you on the issue of that abortion should be out of politics, should be out of national politics, out of state politics, out of city politics, and out of politics altogether, and it should be confined simply as and treated simply as a matter of privacy between a woman and her husband and her boyfriend and a woman and her doctor, or a woman and her doctor. And that's simply the way it should be. How I don't understand. I would like to know if you know, or if you can speculate or reason how that the issue of abortion and politics got mixed up in the first place. I don't understand how it happened. I really don't know.
I think that yours is a question having. Aren't you asking why that there, or aren't you suggesting that there are a number of things that have gotten caught up in the ways that you describe that you see as private issues, in addition to things like abortion? Isn't that the context you're suggesting, that there are a number of things that get tossed into the political stew pot that you don't think belong in there, and that they're all private matters? Is that your sense?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely what I'm talking about. As far as to take an example with, for instance, with drug use and abuse.
Right.
Things like people that are spending 5
So you're talking about
15
things like
or 20 years in state prison for selling marijuana is absolutely ridiculous. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. I personally do not at this moment pay taxes.
Okay, I think now we've got a place for someone who's a state legislator and a candidate for national office to comment on. In other words, we got it now.
Yeah, there are certainly some areas where, again, government has a legitimate role in protecting people who cannot protect themselves, and public safety, as we discussed earlier with the train accident. But there are also areas where government cannot best resolve the problems, that we need to allow communities and individuals to assert their responsibility and their accountability. And for whatever reason, government has assumed more responsibility because, quite frankly, we as citizens have asked them to step in and assume responsibility than we are now willing to pay for. So we need to have a discussion of what legitimate role government has and what things individuals can accept back for their own responsibility, and what problems can be resolved in the community. And those are discussions we need to have. Clearly, we cannot resolve the drug problem in this nation by simply locking people up. We don't have enough money to do it. We need to address problems through treatment and prevention and education.
Caller.
Yes, I thoroughly agree with you, ma'am, in that respect, that such things as the drug problem in this country cannot be properly handled by the United States government vis-a-vis law enforcement, because of this issue of that one cannot legislate morality. That is, one cannot allow
You know, I appreciate your comments, and can we go to another caller who's waiting on line 2?
I'll be more than happy to hang up and listen to
Hey,
this
thanks
discussion.
very much. Okay.
Good night.
Hello, you're on the air.
Yeah, Mignon. Yeah, my name is Walt. I'd just like to ask a couple of questions. One, and I didn't get a chance to thank Pat when they had his little meeting here after he announced his retirement, but I wanted to thank him for his support of the Second Amendment. I'd like to find out what your thoughts are on supporting the Second Amendment, and if you feel, as it's worded, is it an individual right or a collective right?
Could you expand a little bit more on what specifically you'd...
Well, the specific thing with regards to the right to keep and bear arms is something that some intellectuals put a spin on, and that is to say, well, that the militia is really the National Guard, and that the right to keep and bear arms is something that's contained in for the militia only, and not individual owners, individual citizens. And that's one of the issues, and I'd just like to know how you feel about that particular issue.
I think individual gun ownership is very important to Montanans, and I support it.
And that would be true when you would go up for votes, like whether it would be for a newer version or expanded version of the Brady bill, or expanded crime control bills or terrorist bills.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think in any of those areas of legislation, we certainly need to remember the right of individuals to keep and bear arms, yes.
Okay, good. Second question has to do with, you had previously mentioned and discussed the Department of Education, and this is a Republican line. This is that the Department of Education at the federal level spends millions and millions, and perhaps billions of dollars every year, but they don't educate citizen one. They don't educate any students, and so the only hope that I see for our public schools is through the notion that we could get more efficiency from our schools if there was more competition, i.e. the public schools are a near monopoly, and we all know monopolies like to try to hog the situation, and they will do whatever is possible to protect that monopoly, and to the detriment of the students and to the taxpayers. Do you support issues that promote competition?
What I support is quality education, and I think we're blessed in Montana to have strong local control of education, where parents can be involved in their schools, business people can be involved in their schools, and I don't believe it has to be an either-or. There always needs to be the option for individuals to send their children to private schools or to parochial schools if that's their wish. But I think a strong public education system has been at the very core of America, and we cannot survive as a democracy without quality education for all of our children. That competition can come from within public schools if parents and business people are involved in education, and that's the beauty of Montana, is we have strong public involvements, and Montanans believe in public education.
So would I gather then, do you support or oppose competition enhancing devices like refundable income tax credits or vouchers?
I think in a system in Montana that is now strapped for funding, we need to use the limited tax dollars we have to meet the needs of all students, and I think we can best do that through support of our public school system.
So you, I would say what I'm hearing is that you would not support items that would enhance competition for, if I wanted as a parent, and I have two kids in school, and I'm debating whether or not to put them in parochial schools because I feel that they may and probably would get a better education, that if I got assistance through a refundable income tax credit or a voucher, that you would be opposed to such a notion.
I don't believe the Montana Constitution allows public tax dollars to be used for parochial education, but I certainly support your right to make that choice for your children and get the best education that you can for your children, yes.
Yeah, and I understand the constitutional issue of the money going from the government say, a parochial school. But if I, as a parent, if I got a refundable income tax credit, I get the money and I get to choose where I put that money, as opposed to the money going to the schools. I mean, as opposed to the money going to a church or some other institution. Do you see what I'm getting at with a refundable income tax credit?
I still think we have limited tax dollars in this state, and we are best served by strengthening our public education system.
Yeah. Is there any relationship between the amount of money that's given to education and the results?
Without a doubt, you cannot have quality education without adequate funding. But to say that that is the only thing that makes for quality education, of course, is a simplistic answer.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I say that is because, you know, the average student in Montana takes somewhere, depending upon whose numbers you're looking at, $5,000 to $5,700 per student. But the parochial schools can teach their kids for about half that price. And so,
Well, the parochial schools pay their teachers less, too.
the quality of education from the private schools. But I have heard lots of complaints about the quality of education from the public schools.
I've also heard some wonderful stories about the quality of education in Montana schools, and I think we should be proud of what we're doing. That doesn't mean that we're doing as good a job as we should. We need to work to strengthen education in Montana because we all want the best for our kids, and I hear that every day as I travel this state, that Montanans support quality public education, and they want the best in the world for their kids.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I support quality education, but I don't feel like I'm getting a decent return on the amount of money that's been invested. But that's just a personal observation. But thank you for your answers.
Thank you for calling in. Good night. Well, we're just going to take the next couple of minutes to wrap it up, and you know, if you want, let's see if we got a.
Okay.
Let's see if we got somebody who's got a.
Okay. Okay.
We'll just spin that snowball around. Maybe that's not for us. And by the way, before I forget, because it's in my memory now, I want to thank our crew, Richie Doyle, the director, and Jeff Smith, standing back there as utility infielder, and Scott Eshelman, and Alan Matt, and thanks everybody for volunteering your time to come down and helping me out. That's on Missoula Community Access Television. And so we've just got a couple of minutes, and why don't I, ask you to tell us whatever you want to tell us.
You know, I think we're blessed in Montana to have a diverse population that truly cares about the state. And what I've heard as I've traveled around Montana is Montanans want a representative in Congress who will listen to them, who will use common sense, and who will work hard. That's been the trademark of my career in the Montana Senate and in all of my public service. I've been excited, and it has just renewed my faith in Montanans, and that there is no problem that we can't resolve in this state by holding ourselves accountable and our government accountable and responsible for what they do. And I am excited about traveling the state, and I'm delighted that you invited me to be here this evening, and I had the opportunity to visit with you.
Great.
Thanks.
Can you maybe see who's on line one here?
Sure.
Have you got a question or a comment?
I would just like to say that it's wonderful to see you back on the air, Mr. Coyle, and I look forward to seeing many more of your programming.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.
There you go.
Well, that was a nice call to get, wasn't
Well,
it?
it was a nice
Yeah.
way to wrap it up, and richly deserved.
Well, thanks for taking so much time with us. I know it was you're under the lights, and probably in Montana not accustomed to such a long interview. And
Well, it was pleasant. Thank you.
I greatly appreciate your coming, as do folks out there in video land, and they'll get a chance to watch you respond and comment again tomorrow at 3:30 in the afternoon. So lots of luck, and fight the good fight, and have a good time. And I don't envy you raising that money, and I certainly don't envy you spending it on advertising. But anyway,
Well,
thanks for
well,
being here.
it has been delightful, and you know, I've reflected as I've traveled. Someone gave me this Jeanette Rankin pin the other night at a fundraiser, and at times we grumble about the miles we travel and the money we have to raise, but I was thinking back after I got this pin about Jeanette Rankin, who campaigned also in a statewide congressional race in her first election in Montana, and she was campaigning at a time when women didn't even have the vote in this nation. So Montanans have always been sturdy stock if they chose to run for public office, and I'm delighted to be a part of this campaign, and I'm glad to be here tonight. Thank you.
Great. Crew, thank you. Fade up Greg Keeler singing Mama, Don't Let Your Cowboys Grow Up to Be Writers. And thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.
It was delightful.
All right.
Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. Don't let them scribble and daydream too much. Make them be teachers and actors and such. Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. They're lost in their heads and they won't go to bed, even with someone they love. Writers ain't easy to look, and they're harder to read. If you want description, they'll give you much more than you need. Noisy typewriters and turtleneck sweaters, and each day begins with a line. And if you don't understand him and he don't die young, you'll get raised in them old New York Times. So mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. Don't let them scribble and daydream too much. Make them be teachers and actors and such. Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. They're lost in their heads and they won't go to bed, even with someone they love. Writers like black lingerie when it's worn by a penguin. They're just talking and boring the socks off of girls of the night. Those who don't read him won't like him, and those who do sometimes won't know how to take him. He ain't weird, he's just different, 'cause his prose won't let him write things to make you think he's straight. So mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. Don't let them scribble and daydream too much. Make them be teachers and actors and such. Mamas, don't let your cowboys grow up to be writers. They're lost in their heads and they won't go to bed, even with someone they love.